He pointed at the cleaner, with a room full of men watching, the red car sitting behind them like an old wound. Everyone thought it was only a dead machine. But why would a father hide his final message inside it? He's gone. By the time Evan Brooks finished mopping the last strip of concrete, the garage had gone quiet enough for him to hear the hum inside the old light fixtures. It was the hour he knew best. The customers were gone. The Knicks had left their tools lined up or scattered, depending on the kind of day they had survived, and the polished cars sat under coughed covers like sleeping animals. Evan moved slowly between them with his gray mop bucket, a touch, a bumper, a mirror, a wheel. In that place, even silence seemed expensive. Only one car did not look like it belonged among the others. It sat in the far corner beneath a heavy canvas cover, its shape too long and low to disappear completely. The cover had slipped near the rear fender, exposing a slice of red paint that still held a deep shine, even under dust. Evan always noticed it, yes. He told himself everyone would have noticed it, but no one else paused the way he did. The men who worked days called it the red problem. Sometimes, when they thought no one was listening, they called it worse. 7 years, them had said the week before, shaking his head as he passed by with a clipboard. 7 years, and all it does is cough like an old man and die. Evan had been emptying a trash can then. He had kept his eyes down because men like him learned early that noticing too much could be taken as disrespect. Still, he had heard the words. He had heard the little laugh afterward, too. People gave when something had defeated them. For so long, they needed to make it sound foolish. That night, with the garage empty, he stopped beside the covered car. He did not lift the canvas. He knew better. Carl Benson had made that rule clear. The first week Evan took the evening job. Clean the floors, empty the bins, lock the side door. Don't touch customer cars unless somebody with a real job tells you to. Oh. Evan stood with both hands resting on the mop handle, looking only at the narrow red edge showing under the cloth. The car gave nothing back. Not a tick, not a creak, even the cooling sigh newer cars sometimes made after a long drive. It had the stillness of something that had been waiting so long. People had stopped asking what for. Across the room, on Carl's desk, a folder lay open beneath a lamp. Evan had seen that folder many times, thick with repair notes and invoices, always returned to the top drawer before customers arrived. Earlier that evening, Carl had left it out while talking to a man in a brown sport coat. A man who had walked around the red car twice without ever looking sad about it. It's worth more than she understands, the man had said. Carl had lowered his voice, but not enough. Rachel's tired. She'll sell if nobody fills her head with sentiment. Evan had not turned around. He had kept wiping the workbench, moving the rag in slow, even lines. Something in the sentence stayed with him. Not because it sounded cruel exactly. In the garage, people said practical things in cruel ways all the time. Fear spite. Stayed because Carl had said the woman's name, like he had already measured the weak place in her. Rachel even had seen her only twice before that night. A woman in her mid-30s with dark hair usually tied back, flour smudge once on the sleeve of her coat, and a face that looked calmer than her hands. The first time she came in, she had stood by the red car for less than a minute and left without asking if there had been progress. The second time, she had brought Carl a paper bag from her bakery and had not touched the car at all. Peoples in town knew the bakery he had sent him. There once for honey bread when her hands were hurting too badly to need dough. The shop was small and always smelled like butter, yeast, and coffee. There had been a framed picture behind the counter of an older woman smiling beside trays of bread, and Rachel had glanced at it whenever the bell over the door rang, feeling wine. As if part of her still expected someone else to come out from the back room. The next morning, Rachel stood in that same bakery before sunrise, putting fresh loaves into paper sleeves, while the key to the red car sat in the drawer beneath the register. She had told herself more than once to throw it away. She never had. The key was old, worn smooth at the edges, patched to a plain metal ring with a faded red tag. Her father had carried it for years. Henry Hill could forget birthdays, bills, even dinner if he was out in the garage too late, but he never forgot that key. When Rachel was a girl, she used to sit in the passenger seat of the red car and wait for him to take her somewhere. Anywhere. A drive to the lake, a stop for ice cream, fees him. 10 minutes with him not looking past her towards some engine noise only he could hear. More often than not, the trips did not happen. A phone call would come. Someone needed a tow. Someone needed a part. Someone had lost work at the plant and needed help that Henry never explained. He would shut the car door, tell Rachel it would be another time, and vanish down the road with the red paint flashing under the sun. Her time became years. By the time he was gone, Rachel had learned to hate the car with a kind of discipline. It was easier than hating a dead man, the alone. Easier than asking why her mother had defended him, with tired eyes and half-finished sentences. Diane had known more than she said. Rachel felt that even now. But her mother had taken too many secrets with her, in fact, leaving behind the bakery, the recipes, and a daughter who could make honey bread perfectly, but still could not forgive the smell of motor oil. The bell over the bakery door rang a little after 9. Carl Benson stepped inside, wearing his clean jacket and his careful smile. He always looked slightly out of place there, as if flour in the air might lower the value of his shoes. "Morning, Rachel," he said. "Smells like your mom's kitchen in here." Rachel closed the drawer with the key inside. "What do you need, Carl?" He noticed the drawer. Of course he did. Carl noticed anything that might help him steer a conversation. "I spoke again with the buyer," he said. "He's still interested, very interested. But he won't wait forever." Rachel kept stacking loaves. "The car isn't running, he knows that, and he still wants it. He wants the body, the history." The original read, "Some collectors don't care if a thing works. They care that nobody else has it." She looked past him toward the front window. Across the street, a woman was helping an older man into a pickup. Ordinary life, moving on without asking permission. Carl softened his voice. "You've carried that thing long enough." Rachel's hands slowed. He had chosen the right words. Not the car, not your father's car. That thing, as if it were a box of broken dishes, a stained rug, a piece of furniture too heavy to move until someone finally admitted it had no place in the house. "My mother kept it," Rachel said. "Your mother kept everything." It was said gently, almost kindly, but Rachel felt the edge beneath it. Diane had kept old receipts, recipe cards, birthday candles, jars that no longer had lids. She had kept hope long after hope had stopped paying bills. Rachel wiped her hands on her apron. Dad said the car mattered. Carl gave a small breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh. Henry said a lot of things without explaining any of them. There it was. The old wound, pressed with a thumb. Rachel looked toward the drawer again. She could picture the key inside, lying beside a roll of tape and a stack of deposit slips, a small piece of metal for something that had taken up so much room in her life. At the garage that evening, Evan found the red car uncovered. He stopped just inside the service door. Without the canvas, Fairlane seemed larger, redder, almost too alive, for something everyone insisted was dead. The paint had dulled in places, but the body still carried a quiet pride. The passenger window reflected the overhead lights. Evan's gaze moved there, before he could stop it, to the seat beside the driver's place, empty and waiting. Carl stood near the hood, with Rachel and the man in the brown sport coat. The folder was tucked under Carl's arm. "You can do the paperwork after the inspection," Carl said. "No pressure, just a clean ending." Rachel did not answer right away. She stood with her arms folded, but one hand had slipped into her coat pocket, fingers closed around the key she had brought from the bakery. Evan saw the shape of it through the fabric. He looked away before anyone could notice him noticing. Carl went on, his voice smooth and patient. "Keeping it won't bring him back, and it won't make the story any easier." Rachel's face did not change much. That was what struck Evan. She did not cry, did not snap, did not crumble. The only looked at the car as if she were trying to decide whether the thing in front of her was a memory or a weight. Even lowered his eyes and pushed the mop bucket along the wall. He had no place in that conversation. He knew it. As he passed the red car, close enough now to smell dust and old upholstery. Something caught his attention. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The dashboard looked untouched. The old radio sat slightly crooked in its frame, the tiniest misalignment. The kind Boostpool would miss unless they had spent years watching their father repair things no one else had patience for, even slowed. Carl saw him. "Floor's not going to mop itself," he said, without turning fully, even moved on. Behind him, Rachel drew the key from her pocket. The metal clicked softly against her ring. "I'll think about it tonight," she said. Cyril's smile widened, just enough to show he had heard more than the words. To him, it was almost a yes. To Evan, standing near the wall with one hand still on the mop handle, it sounded like a door closing before anyone had checked what was trapped on the other side. The next afternoon, the canvas cover stayed off the red Fairlane. That alone changed the feeling in the garage. Viscide. The car no longer looked like something stored away. It looked like something being judged. A couple of mechanics drifted in and out of the bay, pretending to look for tools. Found. The man in the brown sport coat came back with a thin folder under his arm. Carl stood near the driver's side, with the easy confidence of a man who believed if Bard part was already over. Rachel arrived 10 minutes late. He came in, wearing her bakery coat, her hair pulled back, her face calm in the way people looked when they had spent the drive over telling themselves not to feel too much. She did not look at Evan. There was no reason she should have. He was pushing his mop bucket along the wall, trying to make himself small enough not to be noticed. But he noticed her. He noticed the way her hand went into her coat pocket before she got close to the car. He noticed how her eyes moved past the hood, past the windshield, straight to the passenger seat. For 1 second, till all the hardness in her face loosened. Then Carl stepped beside her, and it came back. "I appreciate you coming in," Carl said. "This won't take long." Rachel gave a short nod. "I don't want a sales pitch for me." That was not true, and Evan knew it before Carl finished smiling. The buyer walked slowly around the Fairlane, careful not to touch it. He asked about the paint, the body, the paperwork, failed repairs. Carl answered each question smoothly. He used words that made the car sound less like a memory and more like an object waiting to be turned into money. Original body, clean lines, strong collector interest, operation potential. Rachel listened with her arms folded. When the buyer asked if the engine had ever turned over, Carl gave a little shrug. For a breath, maybe. Then it dies. Same story for years, and mechanics near the tool bench gave a quiet laugh. "That thing's got more pride than sense." Another one smiled. "Maybe it knows nobody wants to drive it." Rachel's jaw tightened, and Evan lowered his mop into the bucket and wrung it out slowly. He did not like the way they talked about the car in front of her. Not because he believed cars had feelings. He did not. But he knew when people were really talking about someone else. Carl turned toward Rachel. "You hear that? Even the boys are tired of fighting it." "They're not the ones selling it," Rachel said. "No," Carl said gently. "They are the ones who've had to watch good time and good money disappear under that hood." Evan glanced at the hood, then at the dashboard. That crooked radio still bothered him. It sat just a hair off-center, almost nothing enough. The rest of the dash looked untouched, in a careful, old-fashioned way. A car like that carried its age honestly. Screws wore down, chrome dulled, vinyl cracked at the seams, VBO. But that radio looked as though someone had taken it out and put it back with hands that wanted no one to know, even. Was still looking when Carl caught him. "Something interesting. Over there?" The words cut across the garage. Mechanics turned. The buyer looked over his glasses. Rachel followed Carl's gaze and saw Evan standing with the mop handle in one hand, his eyes still near the car's interior. Even straightened. "No, sir." Carl smiled without warmth. "No? Because you've been staring at that dash like it owes you money." A small laugh moved through the room. Evan felt heat rise along the back of his neck. He had learned long ago that embarrassment had a sound. It was not loud. It was the soft scrape of people enjoying the moment just enough to deny it later. "I was just cleaning around the bay," he said. "You clean floors," the Earl said. "The car is not the floor." Rachel looked from Carl to Evan. Her expression changed, not into kindness exactly, but into irritation sharpened by being cornered one time, too many. "Leave him alone," she said. Carl lifted both hands, amused. "I'm only saying we've had actual mechanics look at this car." That was when one of the younger mechanics, maybe wanting Carl's approval, leaned against the bench and said, "Phoebe, we should let him try. Can't do worse, right?" The laugh was bigger this time. Evan looked down at the mop bucket for a moment. He considered pushing it away, finishing the back hall, letting the whole room forget him again. There was safety in that, a kind of peace, even if it tasted bitter. He needed the job. His mother needed the money. Pride did not pay bills, and a man could lose a great deal by proving he had been insulted. Then Rachel spoke, softly, not kindly, but with something in her voice that sounded like it had broken loose before she could stop it. "All right," she said, turning toward him. "You've been looking at it since I walked in. Do you see something they don't, Evan?" The room went quiet around his name. Evan looked up. He had not known she knew it. Carl's smile thinned. "Rachel, no," she said, still looking at Evan. "I want to hear it." Evan's fingers tightened on the mop handle. "I don't know yet." The buyer gave a polite cough, as if the conversation had become a little too local for his taste. Rachel took one step closer to Evan, and the red car sat between them and everyone else, bright and silent. "Then tell me this," she said. "Do you dare try?" Carl let out a short laugh. "Come on," but Rachel did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Evan. For the first time, he saw what was underneath the anger. Not cruelty, not even disbelief. Exhaustion. The kind that came from standing beside the same locked door for years and hating yourself for still wanting it to open, and set the mop carefully against the wall. The small movement changed the room more than any speech could have. The men by the tool bench stopped smiling. Carl's face hardened. Rachel watched him, as if she had already regretted the question but could not take it back. "I can't promise I can fix it," Evan said. Carl muttered. "There's a shock." Evan did not answer him. He looked at Rachel. "If you'll give me 48 hours, I'll look. No charge. No parts ordered without your say-so. If I'm wrong, you sell it and I don't bring it up again." Rachel searched his face. "Why 48 hours, Beaumont?" "Because I don't want to guess." That answer did not impress the mechanics. It did something else to Rachel. Her shoulders lowered a fraction, as if she had been waiting for someone in that garage to say a sentence that did not sound like a transaction. Carl stepped in. "Rachel, this is not a sensible way to handle a serious sale." "Maybe not," she said. "You're going to delay a buyer for the janitor?" Evan held still. Rachel turned then, slowly, and looked at Carl. "I'm going to delay a buyer for my father's car." No one laughed after that. Carl's mouth pressed into a line. There were too many witnesses for him to push harder. He gave the buyer an apologetic look and spoke in a lower voice about rescheduling. The mechanics wandered back toward their benches, pretending the moment had not embarrassed them too. Rachel took the key from her pocket and held it out to Evan. For a second, he did not take it. The key looked smaller in her hand than he expected. Worn, dull, ordinary, yet the whole room seemed to lean toward it. When Evan finally accepted it, Rachel did not let go right away. "If you break something," she said, "tell me the truth. I will. If you find nothing, tell me that too. I will." He released the key. Evan walked to the driver's side, opened the door, and leaned into the cabin. The smell of old upholstery rose around him. He did not reach for the ignition. He did not touch the hood latch. He moved one hand under the lower edge of the dashboard, then paused near the radio. Carl saw it and frowned. "You're starting there?" Evan did not look back. "Yes, not under the hood?" "Not yet." Behind him, garage had gone quiet again, but it was no longer the same silence as before. It had weight now, curiosity, doubt, a little resentment. Even slid onto the edge of the seat, careful and still, the key resting in his palm. In Fairlane, waited around him, smelling of dust, vinyl, and something older than repair bills. And while everyone else stared at the engine bay, Evan lowered his eyes to the dashboard and listened for what they had all missed. Garage did not empty all at once after Rachel gave Evan the key. It emptied in layers. First, the buyer left, folding his thin folder under one arm, as if the whole delay had been an inconvenience, not a mercy. Then, the mechanics drifted back to their benches, speaking in low voices, giving Evan the sideways looks men gave when they expected a fall and wanted a good view of it. Carl stayed the longest. Deal. He stood near the office door with his arms crossed, watching Evan sit in the red car, as though the seat itself had been handed to the wrong person. Rachel remained by the front fender. She had not changed her mind. Not exactly. The moment the key left her hand, but the moment the face left her hand, something in her face had tightened. She looked like a woman who had delayed a sale and already wished she could call the words back. Evan did not turn the key. It was the first thing everyone noticed. He sat still behind the wheel, one hand resting near the lower edge of the dashboard, the other hanging loose at his side. He listened. Not to the engine, not yet. To the faint, fear silence behind the dash, where old wires settled and old parts held their breath. Carl finally gave a short laugh. Well, this is inspiring. Evan said nothing. Rachel glanced at Carl, then back at Evan. You going to try to start it? Not yet, Evan said. Carl's mouth tightened. Of course not. Evan leaned closer to the radio. It was an old unit, the kind with a narrow glass face and a needle that moved across faded numbers. And someone had wiped it clean more than once, but dust still sat deep in the edges. The knob on the right felt looser than it should have. The left one resisted slightly, then gave with a dry little click. That sound made him pause. It was too clean, not new, not repaired recently, but intentional. A small mechanical answer hidden inside a part everyone had treated like decoration. Rachel took a step closer. What is it? I'm not sure. Stepped forward before she could ask more. If he starts pulling apart the dash, you'll have a bigger problem than a dead car. Evan kept his eyes on the radio. I'm not pulling anything apart. Then what are you doing? Listening. The words settled awkwardly in the room. One mechanic looked down, trying not to smile. Carl did smile. Rachel did not. Evan turned the right knob again, slower this time. Static breathed through the old speaker, dry and uneven. The sound was so soft that Rachel had to move nearer to hear it. Evan adjusted the dial a fraction. The static changed. Not louder, not clearer, just different. A door shifting on its hinges somewhere behind a wall. The dashboard lights flickered once. Everyone saw it. Carl stopped smiling. Evan removed his hand and sat back. The lights went dull again. For the first time that evening, Rachel's voice came out quieter. What did you do? I don't know yet, Evan said, but the radio is tied into something it shouldn't be tied into. Carl moved fast enough that the floor creaked under his shoe. That's nonsense. Radio has nothing to do with ignition. It shouldn't, Evan said. The answer was calm, and somehow that made it harder for Carl to dismiss. Evan did not sound like a man showing off. He sounded like a man who had found the edge of a thread and did not want anyone yanking it loose before he knew where it led. Rachel looked from Evan to Carl. Can he keep working? Carl's jaw worked once. You're asking me? Telling you. That ended the discussion, but not the pressure in the room. By the time the last mechanic left, and Carl shut himself in the office, night had gathered outside the garage windows and stayed in the car with a small work light clipped low beneath the dash. He did not remove anything that could not be replaced. He traced wires by touch, checked the old connections, and returned again and again to the radio. Same thing happened every time. At most positions, nothing. At one narrow place on the dial, the dashboard gave that faint flicker, as if the car recognized something and then lost it. Near midnight, feeling. Evan wrote the number down on the back of a parts envelope. It was not a station he knew. The sound that came through was only static, but the old needle trembled when it reached that spot. He stared at it for a long time, and he thought of his mother. Ruth did not like late calls. She believed bad news traveled after dark, and good news could wait until morning. So Evan waited until the next day for a few hours of sleep that did not feel like sleep at all, then drove to the small house where she kept her curtains open and her old things in careful boxes. She opened the door before he knocked twice. The imbecile. You look like your father when he didn't know whether to be proud or scared, she said. Evan almost smiled. I need to ask you something. In the kitchen, he wrote the radio number on a napkin and slid it across the table. He looked at it, and the change in her face was small but clear. Her fingers rested on the edge of the napkin without touching the ink. Where did you see that? In the red car at the garage. Ruth's eyes moved to the window, though there was nothing outside but the quiet street and a line of bare shrubs. That was the gospel station, she said. A little local thing. Gone a long time now. You sang there? On Sunday mornings, sometimes, before you were born. Before life got so practical, Evan waited. He had learned from his mother that silence, if treated gently, could do more than questions. Ruth folded the napkin once, then unfolded it again. Hill used to come by after the broadcasts. Not every week, but often enough. He drove that red car like he was trying not to be noticed in the loudest thing in town. Evan looked up. You knew him? Not well. She paused. He wasn't much for explaining himself. But he carried bags from the bakery sometimes. Bread, rolls, whatever Diane could spare. He'd ask who was having a hard week, and then he'd be gone before anyone could make a fuss over him. Felt the thread pull tighter. At the garage, Rachel was waiting beside the car when he returned. Carl was behind the glass wall of the office, pretending to read something. He looked up the moment Evan entered. Well? Paul asked. Evan held out the napkin. The number on the radio. It was a station. My mother remembered it. Rachel did not take the napkin at first. What does that have to do with my father's car? I don't know all of it yet. Face closed. Then, don't make it sound like you do. I'm not. That answer stopped her, but only for a second. Evan opened the passenger door and leaned across the seat toward the glove compartment. He had checked it once in the night and found nothing but brittle papers and an old registration sleeve. But after Ruth's story, he looked again, feeling along the upper inside edge where the lining had pulled slightly away. His fingers touched something square. Not paper. Plastic. He drew out a small cassette tape in a clear case, cloudy with age. There was no label on the front. Only a strip of old masking tape across the side, with one word written in faded ink. Rachel. The garage seemed to shrink around her name. Carl came out of the office. What is that? Evan did not answer him. He handed the cassette to Rachel. For a moment, she held it like it might break from the warmth of her palm. Her eyes stayed on the handwriting. Whatever anger she had been holding began to loosen. Something more frightening took its place. No, she said softly. Not to Evan. Not to Carl. Maybe not even to the tape. There was an old player in the office. Find Carl used for customers who brought in outdated audio from restored cars. He brought it out, reluctantly, his face too still. Evan noticed that. So did Rachel, though she said nothing. The tape clicked into place. First, there was only hiss. Then a man's voice came through, low and worn, with pauses between words as if speaking had never been easy for him. Rachel's hand went to the edge of the workbench. The voice said her name, not loudly, dramatically. Just the way a father says a daughter's name when he has carried it alone for too long. Rachel closed her eyes. By the time the first few sentences passed, the story she had hated for years had begun to loosen in her hands. Her father's voice did not sound like a man defending himself. It sounded like a man trying, too late, to tell his daughter where he had been when she thought he had chosen the road over home. Rachel did not move when the tape kept playing. The voice coming through the little speaker was rough with age and static, was unmistakably a father's voice. Not the strong, joking voice she remembered from childhood, and not the distant silence she had carried in her mind for years. This voice was tired, careful, almost afraid of being too late. Evan stood beside the workbench with his hands at his sides. He did not touch the tape player. He did not look at Carl. He watched Rachel because the whole room seemed to depend on whether she could keep standing. On the tape, Henry spoke in pieces, stopping now and then, as if he had written nothing down and had to gather courage for every word. He talked about the bakery, about Diane, nights when the plant workers came home with empty lunch pails and wives who would not ask for help out loud. He talked about loading bread into the red car after closing, telling Rachel he had one more errand, driving out, past the edge of town before dawn. Rachel's fingers tightened around the table. He never said, she whispered. Ruth, who had come back with Evan that morning, lowered her eyes. Some men of that generation didn't know how. Carl stood near the office door, his face pale with irritation rather than sorrow. A tape doesn't prove anything. People say all kinds of things when they're old and sentimental. Rachel turned to him. Then, it was not anger that changed her face. Anger would have been easier. This was worse for Carl. It was the look of a woman beginning to count every time he had hurried her past a question. You told me there was nothing left in the records, she said. Carl opened his mouth. There wasn't anything useful. Show me. The garage went still. Carl gave a stiff laugh. Rachel, we're in the middle of. Show me. One mistook the second time for a request. For a moment, Carl did nothing. Then he walked into the office with Rachel behind him, Evan following at a distance. Ruth stayed beside the car, hand resting lightly on the open passenger door, as if she were standing near a bed where someone was finally waking up. Carl pulled out the folder he had shown so many times before. Invoices, repair notes, failed inspections, the same neat story he had been selling for years. Rachel did not take it. The other folder, she said. His hand stopped. Evan saw it happen. A small pause. A little too long. Carl looked at him then, and for the first time, he looked at Evan, as if Evan were invisible. He looked at him as if the man with the mop had become a witness. Behind a row of old manuals, Carl finally pulled out a thinner envelope. Its edges were soft from being handled. Inside were maintenance notes in Henry's handwriting, a faded list of family names, and half a dozen thank you letters from people Rachel had known only as customers at the bakery. One letter had Diane's name on it. Rachel sat down before her knees could make the decision for her. The story did not become simple after that. Pain never did. The letters did not give her back the birthdays Henry had missed, alone, or the afternoons she had spent in the passenger seat, waiting for a drive that never came. They did not erase Diane's tired hands or the bills on the kitchen table, but they changed the shape of the wound. Her father had been gone, yes. But not always away from them. Sometimes he had been carrying what the family could spare to people who had even less, and he had paid for that kindness with the silence of his own house. When they returned to the fair lane, Evan asked everyone to step back. He sat behind the wheel again. This time, Rachel stood at the passenger side, one hand on the roof. Ruth remained near the front fender. Carl stood farther away, no longer giving instructions. Fizen turned the radio dial slowly until the old needle settled on the forgotten frequency. Static filled the garage, thin and trembling. He waited for the small click behind the dashboard, then turned the key and coughed off. Once Rachel shut her eyes. It coughed again, deeper this time, then caught with a low, uneven rumble that rolled through the concrete floor and into the chests of everyone standing there. The red car shook lightly, not like something dying, but like something stiff from sleep. Ruth Hoffert covered her mouth. Rachel laughed once, but it broke before it became a laugh. She pressed her palm against the roof of the car and bowed her head. Carl said nothing. By the end of the week, he no longer had a desk in that garage. The buyer backed away when the hidden papers came out, and Carl's reputation, built on knowing the value of old things, did not survive the news that he had hidden the one value that mattered most. No one made a spectacle of it. Small towns rarely needed to. People simply stopped trusting his version of things. Evan did not brag. He came in the next evening and finished his shift. That was what touched Rachel most. He still emptied the trash, still rinsed the mop bucket, still leave carefully around the sound, still moved carefully around the cars. But when she asked him to help start a small community restoration program through the garage, he looked down for a moment before he answered, as if he had to learn what being seen felt like. Festival came on a warm afternoon, with folding tables, paper plates, children running between booths, and the smell of sugar and fried dough in the air. Rachel arrived late because the bakery had been crowded since sunrise. In the backseat of the red Fairlane were loaves of honey bread wrapped in brown paper, Diane's recipe. Rachel slid into the passenger seat first. She sat there for a moment without speaking, her hand resting on the old vinyl where a younger version of herself had once waited and waited. Then she moved behind the wheel. Yvonne stood near the curb, with Ruth beside him. As the car rolled forward, people turned. Some clapped. Few older women wiped their eyes when they saw the bread in the back and understood before anyone explained. The Fairlane moved slowly down the festival street, bright red under the afternoon sun, no longer hidden under canvas, no longer waiting in the corner of a garage. Rachel drove with both hands on the wheel, and for the first time in years, the empty passenger seat beside her did not feel like proof that her father had left. It felt like a place where something quiet had finally come home.